Hello and welcome to Tata Literature Live, the Mumbai International Lit Fest, co-sponsored by Tata Steel and Tata Projects and powered by Godrej. There will be a short Q&A at the end of the session, so please leave any questions in the comments section. Today's session is a conversation that aims to shine a light on what it's like to be a Muslim in India, beginning with our own experiences and further highlighting the experiences of Muslims all over India from varying backgrounds. We have with us today Ms. Ghazala Wahab. Ghazala is the executive editor at Force, where she writes on homeland security, terrorism, Jammu and Kashmir, left-wing extremism and religious extremism, and contributes a column, First Person. A career journalist, Ghazala has worked with The Telegraph and Asian Age. She has co-authored the book Dragon on Our Doorstep and has recently released a book, Born a Muslim, Some Truths About Islam in India, which is shortlisted for the Tata Literature Live Book of the Year Non-Fiction Award. Ghazala is in conversation with Sandip Roy, a radio host, novelist, and commentator. He is the author of Don't Let Him Know. His work has appeared in many Indian and international publications. His audio dispatch from Kolkata airs weekly on public radio in San Francisco. Now, times of trouble. Let's hear from our esteemed speakers, Ms. Wahab and Mr. Roy.
Thank you, Kokila. And Ghazala, welcome to Tata Lit Live. And before we get into times of trouble, congratulations on being on the short list.
Thank you, Sandip. Thank you for inviting me and giving me this opportunity to talk about the book. And thank you for this nomination.
Great. I thought I would start by asking you a little bit about how the book came about. Your previous book had nothing to do with these issues. You are an expert on security and all these issues. When you started on this book, was the book you had in mind pretty much the book that happened, or did it change dramatically in the course of working on it?
Actually, the book that I had in mind was a very personal sort of a conversation with fellow Muslims. It was not the book as it appeared now. This happened in the course of my research and also my discussions with the publishers, who felt that a private or a personal conversation within the community is fine, but we must also look at the larger issues. And even as I started to talk and interact with more Muslims to get an understanding about their lives, I figured that I was approaching the whole subject of Muslims in India from a very privileged top-down manner. I was actually quite appalled to realize that I was removed from their reality, despite being a Muslim, despite being part of this community. So I think eventually I realized that if I have to attempt anything, any conversation about Muslims, it has to be slightly broad-based. It has to encompass everything about the community in India, right from the time Islam came to India, uh, grew in India, and how this intermingling of two very different religions, India, Islam and Hinduism, spawned a completely different kind of religious practices in the country. So I think the book is not the book as it has appeared now is very different from what I had conceptualized in 2017.
So when you had this idea, when you realized that you had to talk about the broader issues, and ever since the book has been out, and there's been a lot of discussion about it, do you feel that burden of representation now, where suddenly you and your book have to represent this enormous history and responsibilities of Muslims in India today?
Yes, and uh, that is daunting. I had thought that, like my previous book, this would be one book that I'm doing, and I'll move on, and I'll then start focusing on something else. But it has, and I'm grateful for this attention. It has put me in some sort of a position where I am. My opinion is sought, and it is expected that I would probably be some sort of a representative for the community, both for the community and also to the community, to talk to them about Islamic issues, to tell them whether the way they practice the religion is correct or not correct, or talk to the larger society and tell them about how Muslims are being uh, repeatedly pushed out of the mainstream. So this sort of a role I had not envisaged, and it has now been thrust on me because of this book. But I have no complaints. I'm really grateful for this attention that the book has got and the kind of conversation it has generated in the last few months.
Can you talk a bit about that conversation? Do you also sometimes feel like you get put on the defensive, that you have to somehow defend something that's happened? Or on the other hand, do you have people from within the community coming and saying, oh, why are you talking about this issue, washing our dirty laundry in public? We are already a community that is facing so much stereotyping and demonization.
No, surprisingly, the response from the Muslim community has been very, very positive, very encouraging. They have taken to the book very well. And the only complaint that I have heard is that why is it in English language, which should be in the language which Muslims can read. Uh, so there is Urdu translation which is happening, and I hope there's a Hindi translation as well. But so their response has been very good. As far as my being defensive is concerned, maybe because I come from the kind of a background I came, and because of my decades as journalist and the writing that I was doing, I'm not defensive. In fact, on the contrary, I feel that I have the maybe the privilege to be the exact opposite of being defensive. So I'm quite assertive about what I say, and I'm quite unapologetic about it. And I feel that I can get away with it because my reputation as a writer, as a columnist or a journalist is all out in the open for people to see the kind of work I have done. So I am not a parochial or a bigot or a person who is suddenly assuming victimhood. So I'm not defensive about this at all.
But do you feel, some people would say that right now in the current atmosphere around the country, that the space for it to be an opinionated Muslim woman is a shrinking and dicey space?
I think the space for anyone who is contrary to what the majoritarian view is at the moment is shrinking. So it's not just a opinionated Muslim woman. I think anybody who is saying something, or anybody who's resisting this post-truth narrative is finding herself or himself in a corner, and has to constantly, battle this whole horde of people who get after you.
So let's just talk a little bit about the book. I mean, whenever you write a book like that looking at so much history, you are also pushing back against a lot of accepted wisdom that people have about this is how Muslim history in India was, this is how they came, this is what they did. Can you give us some examples of some of the major distortions of that we've come to live with and accept and internalize, that you felt as a writer you needed to push back in this book?
This book, the process of research has been actually a learning experience for me also. I had been guilty of accepting a lot of disinformation which was there in our public discourse, because I never focused so much on this. So and it didn't really matter to me. So I accepted what was being said. But my biggest revelation was that the first historical account of Prophet Muhammad's life and that historical account also kind of encapsulated the early Arabian life and the spread of Islam, came only after almost a century after his death. And everything else that has been written on him or about early years of Islam is based on that. So that was the only single source material. So when I learned this, I realized how is this trope being built about marauding Islamic armies, or womanizing, or primitiveness and various kind of things, sexual profligacy. So all of this obviously has not been the accurate description of early Muslims, or the way Islam was spread. It is true in a lot of Islamic conquests followed after the death of the Prophet in parts of the whole of Middle East and North Africa, right up till Europe, towards the west, and here Central Asia, India, and the east. But in India specifically, it was not the only way Islam came. In fact, the marauding armies of Muslims came much later, before the first Muslims had come, and the earliest were the traders. And I was quite surprised to learn myself that it was not just Kerala, which is in a popular perception was the first place where the Muslims landed. The Muslim traders, the voyagers had come, but the entire western coastal region, it was crawling with Muslim tradespeople, and they were settled. They had settled right from Gujarat down till Kerala, and then along the coast they had moved up towards Tamil Nadu and further north. And that was the earliest interaction of Muslims with the subcontinent. And I also realized that when this was happening, I mean, these guys were there, they were coming by ship. So they were traveling for months, they were here for years before they would go back. So very natural, organic interaction was happening between the outsiders and the insiders. And obviously, some would settle down here, some would establish business here, they'll have local partners. So this relationship was of mutual trust, mutual understanding. So it was not a completely alien religion, so to speak. So when Muhammad bin Qasim came, there was already an organic Muslim population in the coastal belt of Gujarat. So I feel this is something which we didn't understand or appreciate enough. And we always thought of Islam as being brought here by sword, or the conversion happening by sword.
That's really interesting. I mean, I wanted to interrupt you because this happened to me personally when I was writing a piece which was oddly about the history of ghosts in India. I was writing about this book which talked about different kinds of ghosts. And as part of that, I remember I wrote this line even without thinking, where I said, they were all like different kinds of people brought different kinds of ghosts. And I had this line which said, Muslim invaders brought this idea of jinns and ifrits and things. And then I said, then the British brought the British sort of Western ghost. And this person very astutely pointed out, he said, like, do you notice, you said Muslim invaders brought the jinn, but British traders brought the British kind of ghost. Why didn't you say British traders? And it's quite likely that Muslim traders also brought these ghosts. The ghosts didn't necessarily come by sword. And it made me think how much we have internalized these tropes of who is the invader and who is not.
That's true. And the same thing comes to when, the same argument is used when it comes to conversion. Now, there are two things here which I learned while I was researching. One was conversion by sword is not really possible in the long term. I mean, nobody can force you to convert, because religion is such a personal matter. It's not just this life, you're talking about your remaining lives. And Hindus have a concept of rebirth. So you're ruining everything if you're converting under duress. And the other part was that Islam itself, the Quran itself says that for you, your religion, for me, my religion. So there was no religious compulsion for Muslims to force others to convert. I mean, people did convert, and they would profess their religion and tell them, "Oh, this is one true religion and one true God. So Islam is the best religion." But they would never force people to convert. The From the point of view of rulers or emperors, conversion or non-Muslims were required to pay a tax, jizya. So if they were converting all the non-Muslims into Muslims, then who would pay the jizya? And jizya was a huge source of revenue. So why would they cut off their own source of revenue? So it was not just in India, but in Europe, in Central Asia, the Muslim rulers did not encourage local population to convert because they were a huge source of revenue. And subsequently also, I mean, some conversions may have happened by force, but the Muslim ulama themselves were very reluctant to convert low caste Hindus because they also came with this whole sense of being superior. So they didn't want to enlarge the Islamic scope so much that people who were considered untouchables here would then become touchables and kosher for the rest of the community. So there was a resistance to converting low caste Hindus. I mean, using this word, I'm sorry, but Dalit Hindus. So a lot of them did convert, but even within the Islamic hierarchy, they remained, slightly less privileged than the less. Though Islam doesn't have a concept of untouchability, so this untouchability business only affected the marriage business. I mean, you married among your own peer group or people who you were in class sense you were compatible with.
Mm-hmm.
But there was a reluctance. So it was not that they came here and they immediately said Islam or death, as we have been told that was the case. Because if that was the case, the entire area, or in India or parts of Europe or wherever Muslims had ruled, would be Islamic states. But that's not so.
I was recently reading a book that the historian Tripurdaman Singh and Adi Hussain have done about Nehru and some of his contemporaries. And in there's a long exchange of letters between Nehru and Muhammad Iqbal. And what I found very interesting in it was that they're talking about Islam, and the whole thing is actually because around the Ahmadiyya, whether they should be considered part of Islam or not. And there's an argument going back and forth between Nehru and Iqbal. And what I found interesting was Iqbal actually basically says that he has much more understanding, sympathy, and appreciation for the conservative Hindus out there, because he understands their devotion. Even if the God is different, he understands that need to protect your religion, the importance of religion, the relationship with the God that the Hindu would have, than he does of Nehru's secularism, which feels much more godless to him. So he has a lot of difficulty in understanding, way Nehru thinks and wants to visualize India in future, versus he's much more comfortable, in fact, with a much more conservative Hindu. And it made me think, is that a problem? Because the book Kapil Komireddy also in his book says one of the problems secularism has done is that it has tried to sort of whitewash this complicated history that India has, and in some sense by not dealing with the fact that yes, traders came as well as invaders came, and not dealing with that front on, we've ended up in this weird situation now where communalism is actually on the rise, and religious polarization is on the rise, because we have not dealt with our history properly. What do you think of that?
I do not agree with this. I think our history, when I studied history, I read about both the trader part in my history books very briefly, and only about Malabar coast, which is why I thought they came to Kerala. And I also read about invaders. This Muhammad bin Qasim has been part of our history books for forever. So I don't know where this whitewashing of history happened. Yes, it is true that Akbar has been given a huge space in our history books, school textbooks, and there has been a lot of focus on Dine Ilahi, which was nothing, just a small thing which happened and died with Akbar. So there has been disproportionate focus on certain elements, but I don't think it is true that we have kind of whitewashed this history of Islamic invasions at all. The argument or the complaint that people from south of India have that the southern history, the South Indian history did not find space, I think that has more valid grounds, because that is true. Except for a small section on Vijayanagar Empire, we didn't really study much in history textbooks. So I don't think our history books have glossed over this period. When I was researching, it was not at all difficult to find all this material. This material has been available in India. There's so many books have been written on this subject. So I really do not agree with this. As far as Iqbal and Nehru's conversation, I think conservative people like other conservative people, or religious people like other religious people, irrespective of their religion. I, in fact, know a couple, a Hindu-Muslim couple, both of them extremely religious and extremely comfortable with one another. And I used to wonder that how do they get along so well, considering the both religions have contradictions. I mean, Islam doesn't allow idol worship, and but despite that, both would follow their religious practices at home, and they were very comfortable with this, because I think their compatibility came from the idea that they both were great or deep believers. So I have always felt that irrespective of your religion, the fact that you believe in something can bind you with another person who also believes in the idea of a supernatural force, which is why people, irrespective of their religion, they do not get along very well, or they have constant arguments with those who are non-believers or non-practicing people of any faith. I have been told by my non-Muslim friends that why don't I fast more regularly during Ramzan? I mean, forget about my family. My non-Hindu, non-Muslim friends tell me, they correct me during Ramzan. Oh, but aren't you fasting today? So, I think I see where Iqbal was coming from, because I have experienced this myself. But as far as whitewashing of our history is concerned, I do not agree with that.
But has writing and researching this book, well, obviously you just said that you don't fast regularly, but has writing and researching this book changed your own relationship with Islam?
Yes, it has deepened my relationship, in the sense that I have a better understanding, and I am not defensive. The question that you asked me earlier. Earlier, because I was buying into all this popular discourse which was there, so I was defensive and a bit apologetic about Islam. But having researched this and written this, I have realized that actually I have no reasons to be apologetic about not only the religion, but apologetic about Muslims in India. So at one point, I did buy the argument that terrorism is a big threat, and so many Muslims, they are terrorists. And I did buy the argument that yes, Muslims have been appeased since independence by various political parties. But now I do not think so, and I see no reasons why I should be apologetic about this, or why I need to constantly condemn any terrorist attack that happens in any part of the world, and to prove my non-sectarian or non-dogmatic position that if some Muslim has done something somewhere, that I have to immediately jump up and say that this is against Islam. So I think that has changed.
What about when you look around you and see what's happening? What do you think is the bigger challenge facing Indian Muslims today, from within or without? And let me explain a little bit of what I mean. One is within, as in trying to adjust to a country which might feel like it's increasingly more majoritarian. You know, when you see rules Muslim bangle sellers suddenly saying they're afraid to go out to work, or Muslim meat owners suddenly affected disproportionately by laws saying you can't display meat in open things, and small businesses kind of way. So that's within. And when I mean without, I mean when you talk about this way Islam evolved in India, in a country with largely Hindu country, this unique facet of this Indian Islam, is that threatened with, as in, does it feel like it needs to change and become more like Islam as it is practiced in the Arab world?
Actually, I would say that average Muslim is being pushed by both these prongs. So there is a challenge for them to negotiate their life today, given the circumstances that we are in, this constant pressure on their livelihoods, the constant pressure of even expressing their religious identity. So that is a big challenge. But equally, there's another challenge of their questioning constantly whether they are following Islam correctly or not. Because in India, with so much of exposure to the Hindu religion, the Indian culture, actually more than the Hindu religion, it is the Indian culture which has impacted the practice of Islam in India. So even today, most Islamic or most Muslim social practices or cultural practices, whether during weddings or even death, they're very common to what Hindus would do. The same kind of ceremonies, the same kind of dresses, clothes, the importance of similar kind of colors, whether it's white for mourning or red for celebration. So I think all of this has been integral to Muslims. Nobody wondered about it, nobody questioned it. It was just part of their lives. But in the last 2 decades or so, especially with greater exposure that Muslims have had with the Saudi brand of Islam, very, very Puritan. So this streak has been coming into India, where Muslims are constantly checking fellow Muslims. So, and this is not unique to India. Actually, if you see worldwide, wherever the Muslim community is, you see this happening, that there is assault on the Muslims by the Muslims. And I'm not talking assault in terms of physical violence. I'm talking on the practice of religion. Because contrary to, again, to some theories, especially B.S. Naipaul has used to say, or has written in his books, a series of books which he did on Islam, that wherever Islam went, it kind of, it wiped
out of
local practices, which is not true. I disagree with that, because Islam, in wherever it went, actually became part of that social cultural system, as in India or Turkey or Central Asia. It's very geographically rooted or Indonesia. In India also, it has always been a very geographically rooted religion. I mean, Bengali Muslims are very diverse and different from Kashmiri Muslims or Malayali Muslim. So this diversity has been under threat in the last or more than 2 decades. I think since late 80s, where there has been a constant effort to make it just brush everybody with the same color and make it one single uniform sort of a practice of religion.
Do you face that pressure? I mean, especially now, having written this book and suddenly becoming the Muslim expert?
No, thankfully not so far. But yes, while growing up, I did face pressure from some distant relatives who were rediscovering their own religion according to the import from the Middle East. So we at that point I did face some pressure, and not just me, my siblings. We would be constantly be corrected by these newly devout Muslims in our extended family. But I suppose after a point they just gave up and realized that it's just beating against a wall, which is not going to buckle.
Can you give an example of something that perhaps we in India now take as like, oh, this is something very typical of Muslims culture and things like that, but it's actually something that's actually very unique to India, that Muslims in other parts of the world don't do those things?
I have not thought about this. I think even this whole okay, I can only think of the marriage right now.
Yeah.
These ceremonies, from 3 or 4 days before the wedding, you put vermilion on, and a mixture of vermilion, turmeric, and so that you have. It's called haldi.
Haldi, yeah.
So that's again, it's not a very Muslim thing. Or you have bari, where you give gifts to the groom. You go and give before the marriage. Again, a very Indian thing. It doesn't happen anywhere. But in a very negative way, the most Indian practice, which is not Islamic at all, is when you are getting married, the groom is supposed to give money, a substantive amount of money or property or whatever, to the bride, which is called the bride's money, which is like meher.
Yeah.
So this is something which doesn't happen in India. In most cases, the grooms, they kind of get the bride to waive that off, or sometimes they just give a token amount like 500 rupees or some very very meager amount. When in actual in actual text, it has to be a percentage of the groom's wealth which has to be given to the bride. So this is very unique to Indian practice of Islam, where you actually kind of uh, do a shortcut around this. Sometimes you tell the bride that if the marriage doesn't survive and upon divorce, this amount would be paid. But which is not correct, because this is the money which has to be given upfront before marriage. I think this is a very unique Indian practice.
That we've observed. We're almost at a Q&A time, so I would encourage people listening, if you have questions, post your questions, and we'll pose that to Ghazala here. But while we wait for the questions, recently, just when Prime Minister Modi just did the U-turn on the farmer laws, a friend of mine was tweeting that what it also proves is that of course, it proves political, elections are coming up in Punjab and UP, but that happens all the time. But it also proves that as a force, farmers still have so much clout in India, unlike liberals, activists, and Muslims, what she was saying. And I want to get your thoughts on that in terms of the political power of Muslims in India. How it is right now, in your view?
Actually, Muslims are absolutely powerless politically today. As your friend mentioned, that if all political parties, except the ruling party, they made some sort of public statement in favor of the farmers. They came out to support the farmers, including the Congress party. But when the Muslims were protesting against Citizenship Amendment Act or NRC, most political parties had kept away from that, because they saw this as a very Muslim issue, and they didn't want to be identified with anything which was very overtly Muslim. So that itself is evidence that Muslims are right now political untouchables in the country. The other reason for this is that it's a diverse community spread all over India. So the way our politics has emerged, people vote according to their religion, according to their caste, and Muslims are not in a position where they can vote in any candidate. So because their votes are split all over. So no political party then wants to field a Muslim candidate, which is why we see very few Muslims in parliament. And this has been a progressive trend. So I don't see this trend reversing anytime soon. And I don't think we'll ever come to a position where we can have a proportionate number of Muslim legislators because somehow uh, the political parties feel that they cannot associate themselves or they cannot be seen to be speaking too much about the Muslim issues, or actually not too much. They cannot be seen to be speaking about the Muslim issues because the moment the word Muslim appears, it seems like a zero sum thing. That if you're talking of Muslims, then you're talking against Hindus. So that's a very unfortunate thing which is happening now.
So you see people like Owaisi as kind of an exception, or do you think that it helps push the dialogue forward, or it actually backfires?
I think people like Owaisi are very important because they kind of hold some sort of a hope for a large number of Muslims. He's educated, he's articulate, but he is very, very Muslim. So he's like an unapologetic Muslim politician who cannot be accused of anything, selling them out or selling their Muslim cause out and aligning with somebody else. Though he may align and though he may be, in cahoots with others,
Right.
but the impression he creates and the kind of support he musters, or the kind of inspiration value he has amongst the Muslims, I think that is his importance. I do not look at a politician like Owaisi as a disruptor. I think it can be an inspirational figure for a lot of other Muslims who want to get into politics. And I think more educated Muslims need to get into politics and maybe try and get or find some space in the mainstream instead of only being the representative of the Muslims.
That is also interesting. When you see the the question where right now we had the elections in Bengal where Mamata Banerjee was accused of pandering to Muslims. That was the thing the BJP used against her. But ultimately, it didn't work. She had a whopping victory. So as we end our conversation, let me just ask you: do you see that as a sign of hope looking forward, going forward?
Absolutely. And I think not just we, a lot of people were hugely inspired by Mamata Banerjee's victory and they thought that they have started to believe that it is possible to actually push back against this sectarian kind of politics. Uh, but I really don't know how much of this was because of uh, the the group of or the motley group of politicians that Mamata Banerjee had collected with her, because she has some very educated, progressive people in her party. So if it was because of that, or if it was a pushback against the BJP and the kind of negative campaign they ran, so I really don't know what brought about this landslide victory. But I would like to believe that it was because people rejected the BJP and that BJP's sectarianism. And I just hope this can be done in other parts of the country as well.
Well, let's see. We'll see. There are elections coming up. We'll see what that happens. I'm going to hand it over to Kokila, the MC, who's taking the questions from the audience. But before doing that, thank you so much for chatting with me, Ghazala. It was a great pleasure.
Thank you so much, Sandip. Wonderful talking to you.
Thank you so much. That was very interesting. We have quite a few questions that have come in. Our first question is from Sarika Nigam, who asks, in a country in which so many people still struggle for basic necessities, why do you think the politics of identity, especially religious identity, has such resonance both among Hindus and Muslims?
I think in a country like India, uh, people have misunderstood that economic issues or employment or infrastructure or all of this can motivate people. I think eventually the biggest motivator or the unifier of communities is religion, whether we like it or we don't like it. And this is how it has always been. We, since 47, we have been trying to build a very progressive nation. We were trying to build these big temples of development in the form of IITs and IIMs and medical colleges, dams, hydroelectrics, whatever. But despite all this, despite our earliest leadership being so educated, people like Nehru, people like Patel, Subhash Chandra Bose, I mean, we came from all this, but see where we have come today. It is because once the base of our democracy expanded and people from the rural, impoverished, small backgrounds, small town backgrounds, they started asserting themselves. They only asserted themselves in terms of their religion, in terms of their community, in their caste, not even region so much. So I think as a nation, we were always driven by our caste and religious identity. It was just a very artificial construct that we inherited from the people who made our constitution and who gave us those early decades, actually just one decade post-independence, where we thought that we were not religiously or a caste-oriented society.
That's pretty much the Nehru-Iqbal conversation I was referring to. Nehru thought economy would what matter. Iqbal says, no, ultimately religion will.
Yes, and I actually see that happening. So there, I can't disagree with that at all.
All right, we're almost at the end of the session. So we have one more question, which is from Abhishek Raghavan, which says, could you talk about a time in history when Hindu and Muslim identities overlapped and people felt they could be both at the same time?
Actually, when we talk of this Ganga Jamuni, where people, Hindus and Muslims lived together in harmony, we misunderstand this. We think that when we're talking of living in harmony, it means that Hindus had adopted Muslim practices or Muslims had adopted Hindu practices and they were marrying into each other's families. That is not correct. And it is not fair to even expect that to happen. Well, we have a huge history of coexistence. We have a history of social and economic interdependence. We didn't have a history of communal violence. Post-independence, pre-independence, we did not have a history of communal violence. People didn't get after one another and kill one another. They lived together separately and they were happy doing that. And see, there's another thing which not many people understand. Within the Hindu community, Hindu society, there are a lot of class and caste hierarchies. So people of a certain caste would not eat or would not marry into another Hindu caste or community. So it is, it has to be really a flight of fantasy to imagine that they would be going out and eating with a Muslim family or marrying willingly or voluntarily with a non-Hindu family. So we've had these differences, but at the economic and a social level, we also had harmony. They worked together. So if a Hindu businessman, let's say this whole weaving industry, or the family that I come from, we are into shoe manufacturing and export. So the factory owners used to be Hindus, but the workers used to be Muslims, and they both needed one another, and they both coexisted. So if when my father started his own factory, so it was a given because the worker profile was a mixed profile. There were a lot of low caste Hindus also, Dalit Hindus. So all festivals would be celebrated in the factory premises. So there, and a lot of them had converted to Christianity. So the Christmas Bada Din was a huge festival. So, and my father and his, senior staff used to really think of ways and means of doing a big feast on Baradin and make it different from the previous year. Gifts would be given out to workers. So this sort of, or similarly on Eid, there would be a meal for everybody. There will be a grand meal organized for workers. So this sort of a thing was not just happening in my father's factory, but in other factories also in Agra, who were owned by Hindus or Punjabis or people from other uh, castes and communities. So this sort of interdependence is what the essence of coexistence is about. I mean, you don't have to be eating in the same plate, or you don't have to be living out of each other's houses or going to the temples. Now, today people say that, oh, why don't Muslims go to temple and pray? Or it's a silly argument. They will not go to temple and pray because Islam is against idol worship. But it doesn't mean that they'll go and stop you from going to the temple. Sandip would know during the Durga Puja, the Muslims who are actually part of the organization, they're part of the making the Pratima, the Durga Pratima. So that is where the coexistence or harmony comes, and that is has been our history, our heritage.
Right. Okay, that brings us to the end of our session. Thank you so much. That was a beautiful session. Thank you to our audience for being here. Tata Literature Live, co-sponsored by Tata Steel and Tata Projects and powered by Godrej, continues with many more such sessions. Do check them out on the website. The books in today's session can be purchased online from our knowledge partner, landmarkexsite.com. Thank you so much, Ms. Wahab and Mr. Roy. Thank you.